You wake up before dawn, not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the chill of an open sky and the soft shuffling of bodies round you. Your sleeping mat, a pile of animal furs, is damp with dew and crushed into the cold stone floor of a low, smoky shelter carved from the edge of a limestone overhang. The air smells of ash, dried hides, and the faint tang of decaying meat. Round you, other women stir mothers, daughters, sisters, all part of your extended clan. There is no privacy, no doors to close, no rooms to separate lives. Your shelter is open to the elements, but tucked just enough into the landscape to avoid the worst of the wind. You rub the sleep from. Your eyes, your hands already cracked from cold and work. There is no fire left from the night before, so you set about rekindling it, gently blowing on the embers hidden under a thin layer of ashes. With practiced motion, you feed it dry grasses, splinters of birch bark, and finally, twigs. The first flickers of flame illuminate the soot-stained walls and the animal skulls placed carefully along the stone shelf, a kind of shrine, though no one calls it that. Just something your mother always did. While the others continue waking, you strap your youngest child to your back with a sling made from softened deer hide. She whimpers, then quiets as your body warmth soothes her. Breakfast is sparse, some dry berries, a piece of smoked fish from the day before, and a thin broth made from boiled roots and bones. There's no salt. The food is bland and gritty with ash. But you chew slowly, thoughtfully, because you don't know when the next full meal will come. Your life is ruled by foraging. Most days, that's your rule. Not because you're a woman. Not exactly. But because in this small group of 30 people, everyone must specialize to survive. Today, you'll walk several kilometers in search of roots, mushrooms, and wild tubers. You might get lucky and find nuts or honey. You might not. But you know which trees the bees like, which thickets hide edible greens, and which mushrooms your grandmother taught you never to touch. You carry a sharp flint knife in a leather sling at your hip, and a woven basket strapped to your chest. Along the way, you keep your ears open for the sounds of trouble boars, snakes, or worse, strangers. Your child dozes against your back as you pick your way through the underbrush. The morning fog is thick and wet, and your bare feet are already muddy. You walk for hours, stopping now and then to gather plants or test the ground with a digging stick. Occasionally, you find signs of old activity. A fire pit, a scatter of broken bones and paws, wondering who was here before. Sometimes you sing softly, partly to soothe your child, partly to reassure yourself. You return near midday, your basket only half full. It's a decent haul, a handful of edible mushrooms, some burdock root, and a few bitter greens. No berries this time, too early in the season. The child on your back is fussing, hungry and damp. You feed her a mash of pre-chewed tuber and wrap her in another layer of fur. She cries anyway. The older children are playing near the stream, splashing each other and building miniature huts from sticks and mud. You call one of them over to help with water. He fills a goatskin bag and struggles back, teeth chattering. You thank him with a warm smile and a few dried berries from your pouch. In the afternoon, you join the other women to work on preserving meat. A small group of hunters have returned with a rain day yesterday, and it's now hanging from a woodman frame outside the cave. The meat must be cut, dried, and smoked before it spoils. You spend hours slicing it into thin strips. Your hands slick with blood and grease. Flies gather, and you swipe at them half-heartedly. The smell of the raw meat is strong but familiar. Later, you take some of the larger animal bones and begin to shape them into tools, sewing needles, maybe even beads for a trade or ceremony. The tools are made not just for use, but for continuity. You learned how to shape them from your mother, and she from hers. These are more than objects, they are part of your memory, your language, your survival. You place finished needles in a leather pouch tied to your waist. As the sun begins to sink low behind the hills, you help gather firewood. Not too far, you never go too far in the evening, but just enough to keep. The hearth fed through the night. Your shoulders ache, your hands throb, your legs are streaked with scratches from brambles, yet none of it is new. This is the rhythm of your life, and changing and ending, older than memory itself. There is no word for boredom in your language, because there is no such thing, only work, necessity, and the comfort of repetition. You sit with the others round the fire, your feet tucked under your legs, a blanket of fur over your shoulders. Children crawl onto laps. Someone tells a story not loudly, not theatrically, but as though reciting a dream. It's about a bear who turned into a woman. Or maybe the other way round. You've heard it before. The fire casts soft orange light onto the stone wall, where faint ochre handprints still remain. No one knows who made them. Maybe it was you, long ago, in another version of this same life. Maybe it was your ancestor. Or maybe it was just another woman, tired, dirty, cold, who wanted to say, I was here. I existed. I mattered. Before sleep, you check your child's skin for lice, gently combing through her fine hair with a bone pick. You smear some crushed mint leaf behind her ears, not because it helps, but because it smells fresh. You whisper an old chant into her ear as she dozes. The same chant you've heard since you were small. The stars appear, one by one, like silent ancestors watching from the dark. Your eyes close, and tomorrow, it begins again. The sun has begun to sink, though you never measure it by the hour. You simply know by the angle of the shadows, by the cold in your fingertips, by the change in the sound of the birds that the day is folding in on itself. You are sore from squatting too long beside the fire and from walking for miles earlier to dig for roots. The basket on your back has been emptied. The grinding stone is still warm from where you sat on it. Now, with the little ones pressed up against your side and older children sorting through bones for marrow, you move into the second half of your day, an afternoon filled not with rest, but with endurance. The meal is whatever was gathered or scraped or softened by boiling thin broth made from deer bones, crushed nuts mixed with old berries. Sometimes dried meat shredded between your teeth and passed to the babies. There is no salt. There are no spices. The food is not a pleasure, but a preparation for the cold, for the hunger. For tomorrow, your fingers, cracked from cold and ash, stir the pot with a branch. The liquid bubbles slowly, heated by stones pulled from the fire and dropped in. The hide bag swells gently like a heart. You sit cross-legged on animal skins, nudging smoke away with your breath. To your right, a girl watches you work. She is 9, maybe 10. She mimics your movements silently, as you once mimicked your mother's. There are no recipes. There are only gestures. You never call it teaching. It simply happens. Behind you, someone coughs. An elder, ribs tight with the slow tightening of age, stares into the flames. You've been tending her foot since the swelling started. You crushed moss into a poultice and tied it on with deer tendon. You know it may not work, but your hands remember what others did before you. The day goes on like this, not with tasks to complete, but with needs to meet. You braid grass into twine. You pick lice from hair. You hush children, white noses, chew dried hide into softness. You tie a baby's sling tighter to keep the wind from its face. You chase crows from the meat rack. There's no job title. There is no single rule. You do what needs doing, over and over again. There is also the quiet work, the watching, the listening. You know when the men return if they've found something by how fast they walk. You hear it in their feet before you see them. Today, they bring a small boar. It is enough. Not a feast, but it will stretch. You offer no praise. Just take the meat, divide it, slice it while it is still warm and twitching. The others clean the bones, scrape the fat, dry what they can for tomorrow. Everything is used, the bladder becomes a pouch, the hooves might become tools. Even the stomach can be cleaned and boiled for a soup. You take nothing for granted, and nothing for waste. Later, as the sun disappears, you begin the rituals of memory. You tell stories, not because it is night, but because it is the time between tasks. A child holds a carved figure antler-shaped into a tiny animal. You tell her what it means, that it came from the great cold, that it remembers the elk who gave itself in the third winter. The child listens with wide eyes, not blinking. You do not write. You do not record. But your stories are history. They travel in the space between your tongue and her mind. In the firelight, faces take on strange shapes. You remember others, those who are gone. You say their names. You place a flint tool beside the fire in their honor. The flames crack softly, like speech. When there is silence, it is not empty. It is full of breath, full of waiting, full of thought. You feel your knees grow stiff. You stretch your fingers. You press your palms to your cheeks to feel the warmth. Then, the night begins in full. Preparations are exact. You lay out the furs, shake out the lice. The fire must be built just right to high, and it will smoke you out. To low, and it will go out in the night. You stack wood within reach. You check the stone ring. You lay the coals in a bed of ash so they can be coaxed back to life at dawn. Others begin to settle, curling round the center like petals closing. Children are wrapped in skins. Elders lean against younger shoulders. Some whisper still, some hum. The dark beyond the fire is total. You hear it, the silence of predators. Wolves, cave lions, bears. They do not come close if they smell the smoke. Usually, sometimes they test the wind. You have seen the shape of eyes glowing at the edge of the trees. Tonight, it is still, but you keep the club nearby. Sleep does not come easily. You sleep in fits, ears twitching to every sound. You sleep curled tightly, not for comfort, but for space. The stone beneath you is unforgiving. You wake often to tend the fire or shift a child's body. Dreams come in pieces, fragments of the hunt, of the dead, of animals with human eyes. You do not explain them. In the quiet, your mind spins old thoughts. You think of the girl who died last spring, the one who slipped in the river. You think of the last mammoth hunt and how close you came to being crushed. You wonder if it will rain, if your back will ache less tomorrow, if the boy with the burn will heal. The night stretches on. Someone begins to snore. Someone mutters in their sleep. The fire pops sharply and goes quiet again. You feel the fur move against your chin as someone shifts beside you. The cave is filled with breathing slow, thick, human breath, centuries before the idea of history, before anyone called you woman, or mother, or gatherer. You are not a name in a book. You are not a footnote. You are warm, worn, alert, alive, and tomorrow, when the sun returns, you will do it all again, without complaint, without pause. Without ceremony, because that is the rhythm of survival, and survival is all you know. Close your eyes and picture a wide, open land. There are no cities, no farms, no roads. Just snow-covered grasslands stretching to the horizon, broken only by clusters of low, wine-blustered trees and the slow ripple of frozen rivers. It is 30 for 1,000 years ago. You are near the edge of the Mammoth Steppe, somewhere east of what we now call Moscow. The cold is constant, but not unbearable. Your people are used to it. They've learned to live by the rhythm of ice, of herds, of seasons. This is the world the Sanjir girl was born into. It's a world of silence and movement, where small bands of humans, never more than a few dozen at a time, follow the animals they depend on. Reindeer dot wild horses. The occasional woolly mammoth, though these were more myth than meal, hunted rarely and only in moments of desperation or triumph. Her people don't live in caves, not here. Instead, they build shelters from mammoth bones and hides, shaped like tents or domes, sometimes with central fire pits and walls covered in furs. They live together, elders, children, parents, the injured, the strong. There is no privacy. But there is warmth. There is shared survival. They are not primitive. They are observant. They understand the landscape in a way we no longer do. They know where the herds will graze, where the ground is soft enough to dig, where the winds carry scent and where they carry sound. They know how to take sinew from bone, how to twist it into thread, how to shape ivory into spears that aren't meant for throwing. This world, for all its danger, is ordered. And in this order, something extraordinary happens. Near a place modern archaeologists call Sanjir, the people do something we weren't expecting. They bury a child. Not just any burial, and not in any ordinary way. The body is laid out with care, head facing west, the bones dressed in clothing that no longer survives, but which once carried over 10,000 beads, all made from mammoth ivory. Each bead is barely the size of a fingernail, hand-carved, polished, and pierced with microscopic holes. They are sewn in symmetrical patterns, probably onto a tunic, leggings, boots, and even a cap. Alongside her are fox teeth pendants, a polished ivory pin, and long spears also carved from mammoth ivory. These items are not random. They're not utilitarian. They're intentional. This burial is unlike almost anything from the Paleolithic world. It is ceremonial. It is time-consuming. It is rich in meaning. So we must ask, who is this child? Why did she matter so much? And what does her grave tell us about the people who mourned her? The site itself was discovered in the 1950s, but the full excavation took decades. Alongside the girl's grave were other burials, an adult male with similar decorations, and a dual grave where 2 children, another young girl, and a boy were buried head to head, their bodies surrounded by ivory beads, carved items, and symbolic tools. The first assumption made by early archaeologists was that these were graves of high-status individuals, maybe leaders, maybe shamans. But this raises a dilemma. In a society with no agriculture, no cities, no kings, what does status even mean? You cannot inherit a palace when your people move camp every few weeks. You cannot accumulate wealth when everything must be carried on your back. And yet, these graves suggest something more. They suggest memory.ceremony.symbol. The girl's grave alone would have required months of preparation. The ivory beads were not mass-produced. They were crafted individually, each one likely taking an hour or more to make. Thousands of hours of labor went into decorating the clothing in which she was buried. This was not done lightly. It may have involved the entire community. There is something sacred here, something quiet and deliberate. Perhaps her death came suddenly. Or perhaps it was expected. Maybe she was sick, fragile, cherished. Or maybe she was different in ways we can no longer see. Perhaps she spoke in strange tones. Perhaps she knew the names of birds before hearing them. Perhaps she simply had eyes that reminded her clan of something lost. Her burial was not just about grief. It was about memory and belief. The tools placed beside her were not weapons. They were messages. A spear carved from ivory cannot pierce hide or bone, but it can pierce the veil between life and death. It can serve as a symbol, a bridge, a ritual object. One of the spears is decorated with lines, not random, but precise. Some believe they represent counting or time an early calendar, perhaps. Others see them, a kind of writing, or at least proto-symbols. The fox teeth, meanwhile, are curious. Foxes were not staple food animals, but they appear in many Paleolithic burials. Their teeth are often used as decoration, perhaps for their cunning, their silence, their nocturnal presence. To wear a fox's tooth might have been to walk into worlds the known and the hidden. It is important to note what's not in the grave. There are no bones of daily use, no cooking tools, no worn objects. Everything is pristine, untouched, purpose-made. The clothing was likely never worn in life, only in death. It was a costume for the journey beyond. Or perhaps a uniform of what she had already become. Round the burial site, archaeologists found traces of ochre red mineral powder often associated with rituals. Ochre has been found in graves across the world, used for thousands of years to coat bodies, tools, and cave walls. Its purpose is still debated. Some say it symbolized blood, rebirth, or transformation. Others believe it preserved the body or protected the soul. In Sanjir, the ochre dusted the graves like a memory of fire. Soft. Symbolic. Ancient. We often imagine early humans as concerned only with survival. But the Sanjir girls' burial reminds us that they had time for something else, meaning. Whether religious, spiritual, or simply emotional, this burial was an act of devotion. A child was not just lost, she was remembered, honored, marked in the land for eternity. And this means her people had something we rarely grant them, love. That love may not have been spoken in words, but it was spoken in ivory, in pattern, in ritual, and in silence. Today, the girl's bones rest in a museum, but her grave remains a puzzle, a mirror, and a quiet reminder that 34,000 years ago, in a windswept plain under a pale sky, a community came together not to hunt, not to eat, but to mourn. And in doing so, they left behind not just a body, but a question. Who was she? And what did they see in her that made them carve time itself into beads for a journey? You are standing above a grave, but not just any grave. This one is different. It holds not only bones, but questions that ripple out through tens of thousands of years. The Sanjir girl's burial is one of the richest from the entire Paleolithic world, more elaborate than any known adult burial from the same period. Her skeleton is small, fragile. She was around 9 or 10 years old when she died, though the precise cause of her death is unknown. There are no signs of violent trauma, no fractures, no evidence of infection that survives the long decay of time, but something about her must have mattered immensely to the people who knew her. To begin to understand her story, scientists have turned not only to the soil and the objects buried with her, but to her very DNA. Genetic analysis has revealed that she was not related to the boy buried beside her, even though they were interred head to head, in a position that suggests deep connection. This finding unsettled earlier interpretations that the children might have been siblings or members of the same immediate family. Instead, it opens a deeper question: if they were not related by blood, then why were they buried together in a shared grave, surrounded by thousands of beads, with matching ivory spears and mirrored grave goods? Was this symbolic kinship? Were they chosen for ritual significance? Or were they two individuals who had achieved some kind of status, even at a young age, that bound them in death? In most hunter-gatherer societies studied in the ethnographic record, status is earned, not inherited. These are generally egalitarian cultures, without rigid hierarchies or formal classes. Yet the Sanjaya graves challenge this view. They hint at something more complex, perhaps a system of inherited ritual roles, spiritual significance, or even early forms of social ranking. But here's the puzzle: how does a child earn status in a society with no writing, no bureaucracy, and no monumental architecture? Some anthropologists suggest that the girl's status may not have been her own, but rather inherited. Her beads, spears, and pendants may have been symbols of her family's power, sacred role within the group. Perhaps her death was an opportunity to reaffirm a lineage or spiritual tradition, but this still doesn't explain the labor involved. The beadwork alone, over 10,000 ivory beads, would have taken thousands of hours to produce. The community would have had to commit to this project over years, not days, and it wasn't a society with much time to spare. Every minute not spent gathering, hunting, or building was time that risked hunger or exposure. So why make that choice? Why carve time into beads for a child who would never return? Another theory suggests the girl may have been considered special in a spiritual sense. What modern anthropologists sometimes call a ritual specialist or shamanic intermediary. Her status could have come not from age or bloodline, but from perceived spiritual gifts. Perhaps she had visions. Perhaps she sang in strange tongues, or had seizures, or was born with a deformity that marked her as otherworldly. In many early societies, people who stood apart from the norm, whether due to physical differences or behavioral traits, were believed to have special access to the spirit world. Her burial might represent the honoring of such a belief, a farewell not just to a child, but to a vessel of meaning, a symbol, or even a prophet in miniature. And yet, without writing, we can never be sure. Her bones speak in whispers, and even the DNA carries only fragments. We know she was part of a human lineage distinct from modern populations, though still Homo sapiens. Her people were tall, robust, with large skulls and broad faces, adaptations to cold climates and high activity. She likely had light skin and hair, like others in her group. Her life would have been filled with both warmth and hardship, wrapped in furs, seated near fires, listening to stories, watching the stars, but also subject to hunger, cold, and the ever-present threat of illness. Still, her burial tells us she was not forgotten, not discarded, not allowed to fade without ceremony. She was honored, in a way that even adult males were rarely honored in the Paleolithic world. This leads to another possibility. Perhaps the people of Sanjaya did not view children as incomplete or unimportant, as many later societies would. Perhaps in their worldview, a child could contain just as much spiritual weight as an elder, or even more. Perhaps she represented purity, continuity, or ancestral return. There is some evidence in other burials from the Paleolithic that children were treated with ritual reverence, though not often at this scale. What makes Sanjaya unique is the sheer magnitude of the effort. The beads were not worn or weathered. They were freshly made, and they were arranged carefully, in symmetrical, deliberate patterns. This was not a matter of ornament, but of message. A kind of silent language carved into ivory and pattern. What that message was, we cannot say. But we can say this: it mattered. One researcher called it an explosion of symbolic behavior. Another simply called it beautiful. In a society where survival was never guaranteed, this girl's death became a moment for something more, a pause, a memory, a statement beyond time. In trying to understand her, we must also understand that our assumptions may be wrong. We think of prehistory as simple, brutal, short. But what if it was also full of nuance, of social rules, of spiritual longing, of quiet, structured meaning? What if the people of Sanjaya had stories we'll never hear, names we'll never know, and beliefs that shimmered just as brightly as those found in temples and texts? As you imagine the girl lying still, surrounded by beads that once adorned her in layers of clothing now lost to time, try to feel the hands that placed them there. Hands that had known her, held her, made music beside her, told her stories, laughed with her, and finally, prepared her body in the cold light of grief. They sewed each bead into its place with sinew, not machine. They carved each fox tooth with a flint blade, not steel. And they laid her in the ground with purpose. Not buried, but sent. This is not a story about death. It's a story about what people are willing to do for the ones they love. And in that sense, it is timeless. The Sanjaya girl's legacy is not only in her grave goods, but in the fact that we remember her at all. Thousands of years later, she still stirs questions. She still draws visitors, thinkers, artists, dreamers. She still connects us to a world where time was cold. Life was fragile, and yet beauty, meaning, and memory still found their way into the snow. You sit in silence beside the grave, not to grieve, but to listen, not with your ears, but with your attention. Every object placed with the Sanjaya girl speaks a quiet language. These aren't just grave goods, they are symbols, clues, choices made with care, effort, and meaning. To understand her story, you must begin not with her bones, but with the objects that surrounded her, in death, objects that may have defined her life. Start with the beads, thousands of them, so small you could miss them if they fell into the snow, yet each one crafted by hand. These were not casual decorations. Each ivory bead would have taken nearly an hour to make. Shaped from mammoth tusk, it had to be carved, smoothed, drilled, and polished, likely with sandstone and leather. Then, it would be sewn onto her clothing that no longer survives, but which once glowed with the soft luster of polished ivory, patterns in rows and spirals. Across the chest, arms, legs, and even the cap worn on her head. The arrangement wasn't random. The symmetry suggests intention, design, aesthetic thought. Some researchers believe the patterns may have held symbolic meaning: clan identity, ritual rank, spiritual function, but even without knowing their purpose. One thing is certain: this level of decoration represents work, a collective act, a long-term investment. These beads weren't made after she died. They were made before, perhaps even worn before, carefully resewn onto new garments, or reserved only for death. Each bead may have passed through many hands before it reached her, fingers blackened with soot and calloused from cutting meat, turning tiny shapes of ivory into expressions of memory. The beads speak of patience, of community, of repetition as ritual. They also speak of access. Mammoth ivory is not just lying round. Someone had to know how to get it, either from hunted animals or from long-forgotten remains. It needed to be extracted, stored, shaped, and guarded. It was precious, and it was used not for weapons, but for adornment, for reverence, for her. Then there are the spears, 2 of them, carved from the same ivory, long and elegant, but far too delicate for real hunting. These are ceremonial, decorative. Some have described them as status objects, others as spiritual tools. One of the spears is etched with straight lines carefully spaced. Methodical. These lines might be nothing, or they might be the earliest marks of counting. Or memory, a message etched in silence. There is no known Paleolithic language we can read, but lines are a kind of language. Evenly spaced, intentionally placed, they might represent days, seasons, stories, or the names of ancestors. Perhaps she carried not a weapon, but a calendar. Or perhaps she held the record of a myth, a rite, a dream. The lines may not have been meant for others to read, but for her to carry with her into whatever came next. In this way, the spear becomes not just an object, but a passage, a ritual guide, a companion for the unknown. And then, there are the fox teeth, dozens of them, each one drilled and strung into decorative pieces. The fox is not a major food source. It is small, elusive, and not particularly valuable for survival. But in many ancient cultures, the fox holds symbolic weight. It's clever. It moves in the margins. It is seen and unseen. To wear fox teeth may have meant something personal or tribal, but it likely meant something spiritual. Perhaps the fox was her guardian. Perhaps it represented transition, the crossing of worlds. In some myths, though many come from much later periods, the fox is the trickster, the messenger, the shadow. The people of Sanjir may have seen the fox not as prey, but as a mirror, a guide between the visible and invisible. The placement of the teeth suggests intentional design, not just scattered, but ranged. They may have been on necklaces, sewn into garments, or placed in the grave as offerings. Their whiteness would have matched the ivory of the spears and beads, catching the light of fire or sun. Together, these objects form a kind of language, not one we can speak, but one we can feel. They represent time, labor, story. Even music. Perhaps imagine the soft clinking of ivory beads, the rattle of fox teeth as she moved. These were not silent objects. They made sounds, and sounds are part of memory. The objects also speak of identity. In a world without writing, appearance was language. Clothing was biography. To wear something was to declare something: your age, your place, your belonging, your mystery. The Sanjaya girl, buried in the richest adornment of her time, was not hidden in death. She was revealed, laid out as a message, as a vessel of meaning. Some have wondered if she was a kind of Paleolithic priestess, a girl set apart, trained in ritual from a young age. Others believe she may have been sickly, viewed as touched by the divine. In many early societies, children who experienced seizures or hallucinations were believed to be marked by the spirit world. This is speculation, but grounded in ethnographic parallels. In Arctic and Siberian shamanic traditions, for example, those who straddled the boundaries of illness and vision were often treated with both fear and reverence. The grave good suggests someone not merely loved, but set apart, a figure of liminality. Childhood, after all, is its own kind of liminal stick between the known and the new, the seen and the imagined, and in death. She may have become a symbol of that threshold. The burial also tells us something profound about the community, not just what they believed, but what they were willing to give. These objects took time, effort, and cooperation in a society with no service. To dedicate this much material and labor to a single person, especially a child, meant something powerful. It suggests that grief was communal, that memory was active, that the dead mattered. Even when survival was a daily concern, the people of Sanjir made space for mourning, for symbolism, for ceremony. That's what lingers. Not just the ivory, but the intention. The choices made in silence. The work done in care. This wasn't a random act. It was a quiet masterpiece. A message not to us, but to time. A whisper saying, she was here. She mattered. She was more than breath and bone. She was story, and story. Once told with beads and fox teeth and ivory lines, still echoes, even now. You are small, but the world is not. The sky is wide and pale in the morning, a wash of cold light above the frost-hardened ground. You wake to the smell of ash and damp fur, pressed against your mother's side. The warmth of her body shielding you from the chill that seeps in through the mammoth-hide roof of the tent. Outside, the wind hums against the frame low and endless. You listen to it without fear. It has always been there. It always will be. Someone stirs. A cousin, maybe. Or one of the older children. You hear the soft click of beads against bone, the scrape of feet across packed earth, the creak of the wooden door flap being lifted. You do not rise yet. You are not needed outside, not yet. You are still a part of the inner world, the world of weaving, threading, smoothing, of soft tools and slow magic. Your tasks begin when the light strengthens. You help sort the bone needles. You know which sinew is best for a binding hide, and which is too thin. You've watched the others so since before you could walk. You've begun to make your own things, now small, imperfect, but real. A pouch dot, a beaded strap. A fox-tooth necklace with the hole drilled just off center. The older women say you have clever fingers. You like when they say that. It makes you feel real. There are days when you follow your father out to the river, not to hunt but to carry. He does not ask much from you, just to watch and to listen. The first time you saw him skin a hare, you didn't look away. He told you that was good. You needed to see. The world gives and the world takes, he said. To live is to know both. At the river, you watch the light catch in the ice, the way frost feathers across the edges of the water, delicate as hair. You sometimes pick up stones that shine, or bones that are smooth from time. You keep them. They feel like secrets. At night, the fire is low and steady, and the people of your camp form a circle. Some mend their tools, others whisper stories. You sit between two ants, half listening, half dreaming. One of them braids your hair without speaking. You feel safe there. Your grandmother speaks of the stars. She says they are the ancestors watching, that the lines they make on messages. She tells you the coldest stars are the oldest ones, that the wind carries voices if you know how to listen. You try to listen. You always try. There is a girl in your dreams who walks across snow without leaving footprints. She carries a spear of bone and wears a crown of feathers. You think she might be you, or someone like you. You do not know her name. Names are spoken in life, but in dreams, names are felt. In the waking world, you are learning to use the all. You have pierced hide and even bone now. You are careful. Your hands are steady. They say you will be a maker of many things. Maybe more than things. Maybe songs or stories. You are not sure what that means, but it feels good to imagine. The elders have begun watching you more closely. When you speak, they listen. When you walk, they notice. You wonder if this is what growing means, to be seen more, but touched less. to be expected to know without being told. One day, you are given a bundle. Inside are 2 long beads carved from ivory, warm from the hands that held them. You are told they were once worn by a woman who dreamed of wolves and always knew where to find mushrooms in spring. Now they are yours, not to wear. Not yet, but to hold, to learn their weight. You run your fingers over their surface, feel the tiny grooves from the carver's tool, the polish from skin and time. These beads are older than you, maybe older than your mother. You are part of their story now. Later that year, the ice breaks early, and the river floods. You and the others climb the high ridge, watching as the water carves new paths through the valley. A deer is caught in the current, and you watch it struggle until it vanishes beneath the foam. No one speaks. Your father says the land is remembering something. You do not ask what. You begin to dream more. Have light through trees. Have animals that speak without mouths. Of a cavern filled with red handprints. Sometimes you wake with the taste of ash in your mouth, or the feeling of beads scattered across your chest. The dreams do not frighten you. You do not tell the others. You are learning which parts of the world are for sharing and which are for keeping. In spring, you are asked to stay behind while the main hunting group leaves. This is a surprise. You are usually taken along, even if only to watch. But your mother tells you that you have work to do here, that your hands are needed. There's a girl with a fever. She speaks nonsense and shakes through the night. You are asked to sit beside her, to hold her wrists gently, to hum when she cries out, to give her water drop by drop. This is not hard for you. You feel calm in the center of her panic. Your mother notices. She does not say anything, but she nods once, very slowly. Later, you will be told that not everyone can hold another's fear. That this, too, is a kind of strength. The girl recovers. She remembers nothing of her trembling nights. But you do. You remember the rhythm of her breath, the twitch of her fingers. You feel older now. That summer, the camp moves. You travel across wide fields and through dark forests. You walk beside the carts that carry the hides and tools. You help cook. You gather roots. You tell the younger children stories while the others prepare the new shelters. You find a perfect stone flat, smooth, the color of smoke, and keep it in your pouch. You carve lines into it as you walk. Not pictures, not letters, just lines, spaced evenly, marking something you cannot name. One night, you are asked to sing. Not a song with words, but a sound that rises and falls like the wind. You don't know where it comes from. It is not yours. It is just there. When you finish, no one claps. No one speaks. But you feel the quiet settle round you like a second skin. Later, your grandmother tells you she sang the same way when she was your age. That it means the stories want to find you. You are not sure what stories she means. But you nod. And you remember the fox. The one you saw last winter. It stood just outside the camp, watching you. Its eyes were dark as stone. Its breath a ghost in the snow. It didn't run when you saw it. It just turned and vanished. You never told anyone. But sometimes, in your dreams, you see its tracks in the frost. You follow them, barefoot and unafraid, toward the edge of the trees, where the sky begins again. Where the world folds into silence and story and bone. Imagine crawling into a tunnel of stone, your body pressed low against the cool earth as the flicker of torchlight dances across rough walls. The entrance is narrow. barely large enough to slip through, and as you inch deeper, the silence grows thicker. The air more damp, ancient. You are entering a cave, not the modern, tourist-friendly version with railings and lights, but the real thing, as it existed for tens of thousands of years. You're following the path taken by humans long before history, before writing, before cities, before names. Your breath is loud in the stillness. It echoes. The only light comes from the flame in your hand, and even that feels small and nervous against the weight of the dark. Then suddenly, you find yourself in a chamber that opens up like a cathedral, and your torch reveals something extraordinary: paintings, horses, bison, mammoths, lions, all moving along the stone in deep red ochre, black charcoal, and glowing yellows. They are not random, not childlike. They are skillful, deliberate, and older than any civilization that would come after in places like Lascaux, Chauvet, and Altamira. The walls are covered with them, some layered upon each other over generations. The caves are more than mere shelters. They are sacred spaces, chosen carefully and used with purpose. These were not places people lived in full time. They were entered for something else, something ritual, something spiritual, something hidden. The effort it took to reach some of the inner chambers defies explanation. Crawling hundreds of feet through darkness, twisting through narrow passages, carrying torches, pigment, tools. Why would anyone go to such lengths to paint animals on walls where no sunlight would ever reach? Why draw in the dark, surrounded by silence and stone? Perhaps this question has no single answer. But as you stand there, your torch casting shadows that make the animals appear to move, you begin to wonder if these caves weren't just decorated spaces. Maybe they were portals to another world. Imagine the way sound carries here. A single voice echoes endlessly. A drumbeat becomes a heartbeat. A chant becomes a spell. Some archaeologists believe these chambers were chosen for their acoustics, that humans selected the places where sound reverberated just right. Perhaps songs were sung to the painted animals. Perhaps the walls were alive in their minds, the cave itself a breathing, listening spirit. The process of entering such a place would have already changed your state of mind: darkness, breath, cold, heartbeat. In modern terms, it might be compared to a trance, a meditative descent. It's possible these journeys into the earth were designed not just to express something, but to experience something, to feel the presence of the past, of ancestors, of spirits, of animals not as prey, but as kin. The cave was not just a place to look at art, it was a ceremony. And the paintings were not just pretty, they were instructions, offerings, or perhaps memories made visible. There's no evidence that cave art was casual. The locations are too remote, the pigments too carefully prepared, the techniques too refined. Some of the oldest known paintings in the world, like those in Chauvet, estimated at over 30,000 years old, use shading, perspective, even animation. In one panel, a group of lions appears to be running, drawn with overlapping legs to simulate motion. This wasn't doodling, it was mastery. And still, we don't fully understand why. But maybe we don't need to. Maybe it's enough to imagine a world in which you entered the earth like a womb, carried fire like a living thing, and painted animals that would feed your family and guide your dreams. Maybe these places were where humans first began to tell stories, not just with words, but with light and pigment and stone. There are no written records to confirm this. No oral tradition survived. But the walls are still here. The art is still here. And when you stand in those caves today, or imagine them in the quiet of your mind, you can feel a kind of timelessness. A stillness that stretches back through every generation. all the way to the first ones who dared to descend into the dark, not to conquer it, but to honor it. The experience of cave art is not just visual. It's sensory, the chill on your skin, the closeness of the air, the flicker of shadows that makes bison appear to move, horses to breathe. This wasn't passive viewing. It was participatory. Perhaps when the torchlight danced, the animals came to life. Perhaps when a drum beat or a voice chanted. The walls echoed back the voices of spirits or ancestors. Maybe some believed the act of painting helped bring animals into the world or into the hunt. Or maybe it was simply a way to remember them. Because if there's one thing we know about the Ice Age, it's that memory had to live in the body, in the voice, in the marks left behind. There were no books, no calendars, no names scratched into stone. What survived were images, carefully chosen, repeated, and preserved, and always underground, in the places where time seems to stand still. Some caves were visited for thousands of years, others were used once and then sealed. The decisions made by those early humans were precise. They did not choose the easiest places. They chose the meaningful ones, caves with dangerous descents, caves with resonant echoes, caves where the darkness pressed in like a second skin. These were not artists in the modern sense. They were hunters, foragers, mothers, elders, people living hard lives. But they still found time, or made time, to enter the underworld and leave their marks. They still saw beauty. They still sought meaning. And that should tell us something. Even in the earliest days of our species, long before agriculture or architecture, humans felt the need to create something that outlasted them. Something permanent. Something sacred. So next time you see a photograph of a cave painting, or a replica in a museum, remember that it was made by someone who knew the smell of mammoth fat and the sound of wolves in the distance. Someone who could nap flint, tan hides, and find food in a frozen forest. Someone who lived by instinct and firelight, and still, in all that struggle, decided to crawl into the dark. Kneel before the stone and paint a horse. Imagine you're standing in the cold twilight of a Paleolithic morning, the air still damp from the mist of night, and you follow a group of early humans toward a rock face hidden deep in the forest. The leaves crunch beneath their feet, and the only sounds are birds, wind, and the occasional grunt of communication. They're not heading to hunt, or gather roots, or fetch water. They're heading to a wall. Not just any wall, but one they have visited before, one laid with the ghostly prints of human hands. The group carries small bowls made of stone and bone, filled with powdered pigment ochre red, soot black, limestone white. When they reach the rock face, one of them leans forward, places a hand flat against the stone, and someone else gently blows pigment round it, either through a hollowed-out bone or directly from the mouth. When the hand is removed, what's left is a negative image, a silhouette of presence, a mark of absence, a handprint. It's not just a decoration. It's a message, a signature, a trace. And these marks have lasted for tens of thousands of years. We find them in Indonesia, in France, in Argentina, in Australia. They are older than written language, older than cities. Some are so ancient. The people who made them didn't even belong to our exact species. Some were Neanderthals, others were early Homo sapiens, but they all shared something profound, the urge to leave a mark. Handprint says, I was here. It says, this is me, and when you stand before one today, thousands of years later, you feel something stranger, recognition, a human emotion that defies the divide of time. But why hands? Why so many? Why in such hidden places? Were they marks of identity, territorial claims? Religious symbols, or something more emotional, more intuitive, a quiet way of saying remember me. Some caves contain hundreds of prints, clustered together like a crowd frozen in time. Many of them are smaller than adult male hands. Researchers have analyzed the proportions and believe that a significant number were made by women. Others were made by adolescents, even children. This wasn't a male-only ritual. In fact, if anything, it was more inclusive than later historical religious spaces. It suggests that Paleolithic art wasn't about who had power, it was about participation, presence, and perhaps belonging. In some caves, handprints are placed carefully around painted animals, as if surrounding them, protecting them, or invoking them. In others, they seem more random, like people reaching out to touch the wall and leave a bit of themselves behind. Some are made in positive form, dipped in pigment and pressed like a stamp, while others are maiden, native, blown round a real hand, and the techniques were surprisingly consistent across continents and cultures, despite thousands of miles and years apart. It's as if the idea of the hand as symbol was universal, embedded deep in the human mind. One theory suggests the prints were part of rituals, perhaps initiations, perhaps farewells. Another suggests they were expressions of identity, like ancient ID cards. And yet another imagines that the prints had spiritual purpose, offering protection, guiding spirits, or anchoring souls to a sacred place. But there's also something profoundly simple about it. When you press your hand against a cold cave wall, you feel the earth, you feel time, you feel your own body in contrast with something that will outlast you. To mark that wall is to acknowledge your presence in the universe, no matter how fleeting. It's an act of quiet defiance against mortality, and it's something humans have always done, even today. We carve our initials into trees, wet cement, bathroom stalls. We write our names on school desks, scribble on notebooks, spray graffiti. We want to be seen. We want to endure. And in that way, the people who made those prints were just like us. They lived hard lives, hunting, gathering, surviving harsh winters, fleeing predators, burying their dead. And still, they made art. Not just of animals, but of themselves. Their hands became the first self-portraits. Not of faces, not of bodies, but of touch. The prints are raw and physical. They suggest presence, not beauty. And maybe that's what makes them so powerful, because they speak directly to the senses, not the intellect. They are not trying to impress, they are trying to exist. Some caves even contain layered prints, where one hand was printed again and again, years apart, as if returning to the same spot held meaning. Others show missing fingers, where the pinky or ring finger is bent or absent. Was this due to cold, ritual mutilation, symbolic gestures? We don't know, but it adds another layer of mystery. The same mystery that draws us to them today. We may never know what each print meant, but the very act of making them tells us something crucial. These early humans were not just surviving. They were reflecting, they were feeling, they were reaching out, and in that gesture, they left behind not just pigment, but evidence of thought, emotion, and awareness. When we look at them today, under electric lights and protective glass, we're seeing not just art, but memory made physical. These people lived without written language, without agriculture, without metal tools, but they knew how to say, "Here I am." They said it in the most human way possible, not through sound, not through symbol, but through the imprint of flesh against stone. That's what makes hand stencils so haunting. They are not just images. They are evidence of breath, of skin, of contact. Someone stood there, once, just like you are now, and pressed their hand to the wall. And it stayed, long after the fire died, long after the tribe moved on, long after memory faded. The mark remained, a message not in words, but in form, a whisper through stone, a human saying, "I was here." Now that you're familiar with the haunting beauty of handprints left behind by Paleolithic peoples, let's stay in that dim, flickering cave just a little longer. But this time, shift your gaze away from the silhouettes of human hands and look closer down, round, and in between. Because it turns out the walls hold more than images of mammoths, bison, horses, and open palms. Look carefully, and you'll start to notice symbols, repeated lines, strange dots, crosshatches, zigzags, ladder shapes, fan-like clusters of red spots, paired lines, telemarks. Sometimes they appear near animals, as if attached to the creature in the scene. Other times, they stand alone, tiny etchings and pigment marks placed with intention, but without any obvious narrative. These aren't decorations, they're something more structured, something closer to communication. Not quite language as we know it, but not meaningless either. And in recent years, archaeologists and cognitive scientists have begun to suggest something quietly revolutionary. That Paleolithic peoples may have developed their own visual system of symbolic notation, a kind of proto-writing. One of the leading voices in this field is paleoarchaeologist Genevieve von Petzinger. She catalogued over 5,000 geometric signs from caves across Europe and found that only about 30 distinct types of marks were used repeatedly over thousands of years and across thousands of miles. Think about that. 32 symbols appearing again and again, in caves from France to Spain to Portugal, some of them separated by 20,000 years. And what's more, many of these shapes appear in consistent patterns: dots near animals, crosshatches near entrances, ladder-like glyphs in high, inaccessible spots. This wasn't random. This wasn't decorative. This was meaning. Imagine the implications. These marks may represent some of the earliest attempts by humans to externalize memory, to track time, to record events, or to ritualize concepts. Consider the clusters of dots. Were they counting days, hertz, seasons? Were they part of a lunar calendar, or perhaps tied to animal migrations? Some researchers have even compared these signs to early tally systems used in pre-agricultural societies. And the fact that the same 30 marks show up in so many caves suggests they weren't personal doodles. They were part of a shared, possibly pan-continental symbolic tradition. This may have been an early information system, prelinguistic, but structured and passed down, a sort of mental scaffolding, encoding ideas in visible form. Some marks were likely mnemonic, triggering memory through visual association. Others may have denoted place or purpose, identifying sacred spaces, ceremonial zones, or communal meeting points. And while we don't know exactly what each mark meant, the repetition itself is telling. Think about the hashtag or the @ symbol on their own. They mean little, but within a system, they convey power. These cave signs may have operated similarly. Perhaps a triangle over an animal meant a successful hunt. Perhaps a grid of lines represented a territory or clan. Perhaps the appearance of a spiral indicated rebirth or seasonal change. Some of the signs seem intuitive: dots, lines, crescents. Others are more abstract. But all of them speak to a mind trying to capture the invisible, trying to anchor time, memory, and belief in something stable, something that would outlast the day. And here's where things become even more interesting. The use of these signs didn't vanish. They didn't simply disappear with the end of the Ice Age. In fact, many of these same geometric motifs, dots, zigzags, Spirals continue to appear in later Neolithic carvings on pottery, on megalithic monuments like those in Ireland and Brittany, in a sense. The symbols survived even as the people changed. That continuity hints a deep cultural memory, a tradition not of writing, but of symbol using of recording meaning through shapes long before the invention of alphabets. It's a reminder that language, as we understand it, is only one way to express thought. Early humans may have had rich oral cultures, but they still reached for permanence, for transmission. And these signs, simple though they may seem, may have formed the bedrock of that system. Now, imagine you're a woman in that world. Perhaps you're gathering pigment from the riverbank, ochre from the clay-rich soil, charcoal from last night's fire. You carry it back in a leather pouch, smear it onto a flat rock, mix it with animal fat. You dip your fingers, press them to the wall, then draw a circle, a line, 3 dots, a shape you learned from the others, a shape whose meaning you know in your bones. You're not just making a mark, you're transmitting knowledge, perhaps about food, seasons, rituals, or dreams. You're adding your voice to a silent chorus that stretches back generations. That idea that ordinary people, including women and children, may have been active participants in this symbolic tradition reshapes how we view the distant past. These caves weren't the domain of lone male shamans or mystics. They were communal spaces, though. Symbols suggest communication, collaboration, and shared memory. In fact, some marks appear to be layered or corrected, as if adjusted or annotated over time. That implies interpretation, a sign of cognitive depth and cultural richness. This isn't primitive art. This is early semiotics, early coding. So when we speak of cave art, we must go beyond the animals, beyond the hands. We must see the signs for what they were, tools of thought. Prehistoric humans didn't yet have writing, but they had symbolism. And symbolism is the foundation of everything: religion, science, storytelling. The lines and dots on those walls are not mere decorations. They're the scaffolding of culture. They're a window into how minds worked before cities, books, or kings. A bridge between memory and meaning, between flesh and stone. So next time you look at an ancient cave wall, don't just admire the animal painted in profile. Look at the marks beside it, the strange little shapes that don't immediately make sense, because those are the true relics of cognition. And even if we can't translate them precisely, we can understand what they represent, the very human urge to remember, to explain, and to leave something behind. In those quiet symbols lies the soul of a forgotten language, one not spoken aloud, but whispered in pigment, in silence, in time. If you were one of the few in your Paleolithic community who lived with something approaching status, your life would still be cold, your feet still dirty, your belly sometimes empty, but you would be remembered differently. Your days might begin more slowly. You might sit near the fire as others set out to hunt or gather. Your presence wouldn't be idle, it would be watched, measured, possibly even revered. In a world without thrones or writing, status left its mark in quieter ways, through memory. Through the careful placement of a burial, through a carved figure left tucked in a niche of stone. You might be a spiritual leader, though no one would call you that aloud. Maybe they would call you grandmother, even if you weren't anyone's biological kin. Maybe they would say you had a way with dreams, a way of sensing weather or death. You wouldn't need fine clothes because there were none. But your necklace might be more than decoration. It might be a story in beads, amber, shell, bone, tusk, each one carried from another place, each one traded for, earned, or gifted. They might ask you to name a child, to bless a hunt, to soothe someone in fever, not because you had power, but because you had presence. You would not be above labor, you might still gather roots or prepare hide, but others would notice your choices. And when decisions had to be made, they would look at you quietly, not waiting for a command, but for a sign. If your place in the group was truly exceptional, you might be one of the rare few whose death echoed long after, and this is where the traces begin to appear. Not in stories or songs that vanished with time, but in the quiet permanence of burial. In Sanjir, Russia, nearly 30,000 years ago, two children were laid to rest head to head, draped in thousands of mammoth ivory beads, bracelets, and fox teeth items that would have taken years to make. One was a boy. The other may have been a girl. In Dolnev Stonas, a woman with a withered limb and likely a disability was buried with care, her body protected by burnt red ochre. Why would a person unable to hunt be buried with such attention? Perhaps because she held knowledge. Maybe she told the stories, or maybe she was the story among the dead. Some were marked with more than tools, they were buried with symbols, carvings, ivory animals, perforated shells, ochre powder poured like blood across the body. These were not ordinary graves. They were statements, and some of them belonged to women. That alone challenges so many assumptions. Because when we look at early human societies, we tend to project backward, thinking the most powerful must have always been male, always the hunters, always the leaders. But the bones suggest a quieter reality, one where reverence could take other forms. Perhaps it was not brute force that shaped leadership, but memory, voice.dream. In a world where survival depended on intuition as much as planning, people who could sense change, who could tell the sky, who remembered where the herds last passed, were essential. If you were that person, you may not have eaten first, but they would listen when you spoke. Maybe you were the one who knew the old songs, the chants used in caves. Maybe you remembered the time the river rose and swallowed the low ground. Maybe your mother told you things in a whisper that you never forgot, and now you passed them on again, without ceremony, just with a look and a murmur, and this memory would follow you when you died. Someone would grind the ochre and paint your face. Someone would lay you down with care, with your beads, your carvings, your talismans. And long after your people moved on, the cave or valley where you lay would be remembered. Maybe no one spoke your name anymore, but the place itself became a kind of shrine. A place not to camp, a place to pass through slowly, to feel silence, to remember without words. In these burial sites, we glimpse not only the body, but the possibility of meaning. These individuals were marked not by crowns, but by attention. And if you lived among them, you would feel that difference, in how they spoke to her, in how they paused when she entered, in how they sat just a little closer when she began to hum. And it may be that the children listened most closely, because children remember what stories feel like, not just what they say. And when they grew, they would carry that presence with them. That's how memory works in an oral world, through the body, through rhythm, through gesture. And that is why, when we find a grave filled with beads and bone carvings, we're not just looking at wealth, we're looking at narrative, at someone whose life meant something more than routine. A woman whose death was a moment not of silence, but of transmission. The passing of knowledge into soil and pigment. Not every community had such a person, but when they did, they made space for her. And so we end with the possibility that the most powerful woman in your Ice Age group did not hunt, did not shout, did not command. She watched, she remembered, she carried, and when she died, the earth kept her company, and the beads still whispered her story in the dust.